because it was called the Sea of Tiberias, fairly early, but not universally called so. And so called the Sea of Galilee, Sea of Tiberias, and this is why, because of the city right there. This is one of the few miracles that all four Gospels record. Okay? You want to talk about being a big deal. When all four Gospels record it, it's a big deal. This is an incredible scene. There's not very many things that all four Gospels record. This is one of them. So, this is near Bethsaida. Luke tells us that, Luke chapter 9, verse 10. And so that's kind of helpful too. I said earlier when we studied chapter 1, Philip is from Bethsaida. We don't really know where it is. This map puts it over here. We're not 100% sure on that, okay? Historically speaking, right here, this heptagon is where this is generally attributed. In fact, there's some stuff there in this modern city with pictures of fish. You recognize the Jesus symbol, the fish. Oh, I should not have done this. Yes, I know there's a way to do that without breaking the thing, but whatever. Hold on, wait, can I do it? Oh, look at that. It made you jealous this morning, didn't I? Some good artistic ability there. That fish symbol, you say, what does the fish have to do with Jesus? John 6. Why is the fish symbol associated with Jesus Christ? Because of John 6. And so there's what we're working on a little bit in this text. So this is near Bethsaida. That's important. So just tuck that away. Verse 2, great multitude followed him because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. Now remember something, John has already put this in front of us a couple of times. Jesus is not a very big fan of people following him just to see wonders. He wants them to listen to his words. And so you're already seeing some stuff build. There's going to be some tension in the text in John 6. Some of it's being groundwork right here. Okay, laid right here. We're going to see this. So he goes up on a mountain in verse 3 where he sat with his disciples. Jesus pulling away from the multitude, it's hard to imagine what it would be like to be Jesus in the periods of his popularity. Droves of people following him. You say, how many? Well, in a minute we're going to find out it was just 5,000 men, which would mean what? There's more, right? Because of what? Women and children. The folks who get the lifeboat first. So, how many people are there? No way of knowing. Generally speaking, we read the 5,000 and we stop there and we're really impressed. But the reality is, guys, generally speaking, men would have been working. Women would have been there. I mean, I've heard estimates as high as 20,000 people. And in an age before reliable contraceptives, how many children are running around here? Yeah, because the Jews, they made a lot of babies. And so, I've heard estimates as high as 20,000. That's not unreasonable. There's a lot of people. That's the point. There's a lot of people. Now, Jesus going up on a mountain is interesting here. And we haven't read it yet. We will in just a minute. I'll just kind of give it away now. There's a lot of going back and forth here with the mountain. Does that remind you of anybody? Because there are allusions here to an Old Testament fella. Moses, I heard somebody say it, or I imagined it. I don't know if that's good either. But so, Moses, there's a lot in John 6 that is alluding to Moses going up on the mountain, and we hadn't read it yet, but the manna from heaven. Well, what's Jesus doing towards the end of what we just read? Providing manna from heaven in a poetic sense. And so we got a little of that going on. Verse 4 then, the Passover feast, again, instituted by Moses, okay, going back to the Exodus from Egypt and the Passover. So big emphasis here on some of these ideas. And you might also keep in mind, these are some of those big timestamps in John's Gospel. he records these Passovers. There's only 3 of them in John's Gospel. Okay, we already read one of them. This is the second one. The third one pops up in chapter 11. So that tells us his ministry lasted around 3 years, just a little over 3 years. Okay, Passover's once a year. That helps us kind of narrow that down a little. Verse 5, Jesus lifted his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" A couple of ideas here, really important. One of the things he says to the disciples after the Samaritan woman runs off to the village, as they're coming back, what does he say to the disciples? Lift up your eyes. And then he says the harvest is plentiful. Look at the harvest coming in. Oh man, 2 chapters later, what does Jesus do? Jesus lifts up his eyes and sees the multitude coming toward him. That is an intentional repeat here, okay? He told them to open their eyes, lift them up, see these people, and now Jesus is lifting up his eyes and seeing these people, exactly what he told them to do. Now here's something to think about. Verse 5, why does he ask Philip this? I've already kind of hinted towards this in this class. Why does he ask Philip? Philip is kind of a nobody disciple. I mean, you got Peter who can't shut up, and you've got John and James just really close to Jesus. He turns to Philip. Why does he ask Philip, hey, where can we buy some bread for all this? Where can we buy some food? Where is Philip from? Yeah, this area, Bethsaida. One of my favorite studies to do, and I've preached a couple of lessons on this through the years, undesigned coincidences in Scripture. Nothing in John 6 says why he asked Philip this question. Nothing in John 6 even says really where this is happening. But you compare the Gospels, Luke tells us it's in Bethsaida. John 1 tells us Philip is from Bethsaida. So why does he ask Philip where they can buy food? Because Philip's from this area. Guys, you can't make stuff like this up. Okay, you know, somebody's like, well, the Gospels are made up. You can't make up things like this. They're not the point of John 6 or Luke 9 or John 1. But they harmonize with all the information given. There's a really long and drawn-out illustration that makes that point, but I'm not going to take class time to tell you that right now. I should just preach that sermon at some point, because it's really fascinating when you see this. So, that's going to pop up again in verse 10, by the way, so just hang on to that. So Jesus asked Philip this. Verse 6, really important here. He's asking Philip this to test Philip. Jesus already knows what he's going to do. He just wants Philip to work through some of this. Jesus, compassionate and patient with his disciples, he wants them to work through some of these things, to come to some of these ideas that are so important to what they're working on, and to get an idea of the scope of this discussion. Verse 7, Philip said, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them. You want to say, how big a crowd is this? It's so big of a crowd that 7 months' labor's wages won't pay for it. You want to put that in some modern ideas? I mean, what's the average American income, for ease of numbering? Let's say it's $100,000. 7 months of that would be $70,000. Can you imagine catering an event and you have a $70,000 budget and somebody looks at you and goes, it's not enough? How many people are we talking about? That's essentially what happens here. Okay? 200 working days labor. 200 working days income is still not enough to pay for all these people. This is a huge crowd. Now, Mark helps us a little bit here. You may kind of wonder, why is Jesus feeling obligated to feed all these people? Well, Mark fills in some of the details. It's because he's been preaching to them all day, and it's getting toward the evening. So they're worried that, if some of these people leave at this time of the day, they're not going to be able to get what they need. It just kind of be a mess. And so, he says, yeah, you give them 200 denarii worth of bread, and that's not even going to be enough. Verse 8, one of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, here's a lad with 5 barley loaves, 2 small fish, but what are these among so many? Oh, I love this. I love this so much. So here's something to notice. Andrew's only popped up in John's gospel twice so far. Do you remember what he did the last time? Don't overthink it, by the way. He brings his brother Peter to Jesus. You see that in John chapter 1? The last time Andrew shows up in John's Gospel, he's bringing Peter to Jesus. What's he doing in John 6? He's bringing a little boy to Jesus. Andrew pops up like hardly ever, and when he does, he's bringing somebody to Jesus. You want to talk about some really cool applications for us? You might not play a very big role, but your job is to bring people to Jesus, just like Andrew. Okay? You might not be the fellow who preaches at Pentecost in Acts 2, but you might be the person who can bring that guy to Jesus. Yeah, some really good applications coming out of that idea. And so, he says, yeah, here's a little boy, here's some stuff, but what in the world does all this mean? Jesus says, make them sit down, verse 10. There was much grass in the place. Mark 6:39 says that it was green grass. A little bit of an eyewitness detail, but that also coincides with John saying this is during Passover. Super arid part of the world. This is an area that doesn't have a lot of green grass. And when it does have green grass, it's during really short pockets in the rainy season, during Passover season. You seeing how all of these little bitty details kind of complement one another? They coincide. They don't conflict. They don't contradict. You can't make stories like this up, guys. Okay? So he makes them sit down, sits them down, number about 5,000 men, but like we said, definitely a lot more than that. Okay? You could easily say 10,000, maybe estimates as high as 20,000, just no way of knowing. So he takes the loaves, verse 11, he distributes them, and he does the same thing with the fish. And boy, I don't know if you ever helped unload something. That was a dumb comment. Of course you've helped unload something. Anybody in here not unloaded something before? I don't know what to tell you, okay? So when you're helping unload a truck, what does everybody do? Is that it? No, it's a little bit more. Okay, is that it? No, it's a little bit more. Can you imagine the expression on the disciples' face? Jesus reaches into this basket and pulls another loaf out. And he reaches into the basket and he pulls another loaf out. And the disciples just looking at each other. There were 5 in there. I counted more than 5 so far. What in the world? The impression this must have left on the disciples for all 4 gospel accounts to record this, guys. And so he keeps reaching in. Here's another fish. Keeps reaching in. Here's another loaf of bread. Keeps reaching in. Keeps reaching in. How many times he must have reached in, whoa, to feed this many people. And notice verse 12, they were filled. So much so that he says, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. They gather up, verse 13, 12 baskets with fragments. And notice what John says, with fragments of the 5 barley loaves. John is, it's almost like he's still blown away. All the years later when he writes this, it's as if he's still blown away that Jesus could do this. We had 12 baskets of leftovers from 5 loaves of bread. They had more baskets of leftovers than they had bread to start with. This is incredible. And so, when they saw all of this, verse 14, they said, truly this is the prophet who's come into the world. Remember, that's a statement about Moses. Moses is the one who said there would be a prophet rise up from among you, and him you will listen to. This is really just hard to almost wrap your minds around, how incredible this story really is, and the events that happen around it. Questions on that? We're going to have to move into this next section, or we're not going to finish it. Okay, verse 15. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to a mountain by himself alone. And when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and went over to the sea toward Capernaum. And it was now dark, and Jesus had not come to them. And the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. And he said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. So again, John doesn't fill in all the details. Some of the synoptics help us here. There's some chatter. Wow, who doesn't want a king who can feed everybody in the army? You got to remember something, guys. This is one of the reasons why, at least early on, there was so much excitement about Jesus being the Messiah. We want a king. We want a king who can feed our army when we fight back against Rome. Because if we can feed our army and Rome can't, we'll win. That's what they're after. They seek to take Jesus by force. And what does he do? He departs, goes up a mountain by himself again. Again, little Moses here, okay? Goes up on the mountain by himself, away from all the people. So when evening finally comes, and that would probably mean like it's getting really dark, okay? He sends them down to the sea. They get in the boat and they go to cross the sea. A lot of discussion here about where they're at. Generally speaking, it could be over here in this little lowland area where the river comes in. A lot of this would have been an area where he could have had that many people gather up, and that would maybe explain he goes up onto the mountains over here to get away from them. And when you read through John 6, a lot of these statements about the other side of the sea to the Jews would be anything on this side. Okay? So that may be what's going on, but the traditional site is right here. Okay? Just really not going to arm wrestle you either way on that point. There's no way of really knowing. But there are some steps. You ever travel into the Holy Lands today, there are some steps right there where it is the traditional site of the feeding, and it's the traditional site of the sending the disciples across the sea. No way of knowing, and boy, you can really get lost in some of the arguments for that. In either case, either they send the disciples out, or they send them across from over here to Capernaum. The whole Sea of Galilee is not very big. When it says they rode 3 or 4 miles, part of the emphasis is not that they have traveled that far necessarily, but that they have been rowing that far. They can't get anywhere. They can't make any traction. And that's important to note because who are some of these disciples? By trade. Fishermen. And to go a little deeper with that, what's the big body of water they've spent most of their life fishing? The Sea of Galilee. So you've got to tuck all of that to the side when you're thinking through some of this. Able-bodied fishermen, in the prime of their career, on the same body of water they were raised fishing, in a boat they were used to using, and they get out in the middle of this sea, and a sudden storm pops up, and they are no bueno. That's not a Greek term either, okay? No bueno. So here's a picture of a boat. Generally what we think of when we think of a first century fishing vessel, we think of like that little bitty rowboat that has room for about two and a half people. That's not exactly the point. You see here in the bottom of the picture, here's a school bus. And what happened to my clicker here? Let's try that again. That's still not working. So you see this little school bus down here on the side, little boat, not much smaller than a actual school bus or a delivery truck of some sort. And so you can see that right there. These are big boats, okay? These are a lot bigger boats than what you would have thought. And there's actually some records of even slightly larger boats. You might recall, John does not record all of this for us here, but when Jesus is asleep in the stern of the boat, he's down in the boat. It's an even larger vessel than this one is on that occasion, or vice versa. So, out in the middle of the sea, Jesus is walking out to them. I don't know how you envision this. Generally speaking, I always envision this. Jesus walks across the sea, and I almost have this picture of a real calm water. It's in the middle of a storm, guys. Now it's like going up and down escalators. That Jesus is walking up the waves and down the waves. I have no idea what this looks like, but the picture I've got in my head is just pretty awesome. He walks across the water to them. They are terrified. And he says, "It's I, do not be afraid." And they receive him in the boat. And then immediately they're at the land where they were going. Lots going on there. Just boom, 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 boom. I guess we'll leave that there for now. What have I missed there? Something on that? Y'all are a quiet bunch this morning. Okay. Verse 22. Well, if you're going to be quiet, then you're going to be quiet. Verse 22. The following day, when the people who stood on the other side of the sea saw that there was no other boat there except the one which his disciples had entered, and that Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, but his disciples had gone away alone. However, other boats came from Tiberias near the place where they ate bread after the Lord had given thanks. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they also got into boats and came to Capernaum seeking Jesus. And when they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Okay, let's take that for just a second. Verse 22, really, really difficult, okay? Really difficult to translate. It's choppy. I'm sure you picked up on it. Wait, what in the world's going on? Well, part of what the text is essentially saying is they saw no other boat there except the one the disciples used to get there, and now that boat is gone. So they conclude Jesus and the disciples are gone. Okay? It's really choppy, but that's what it's saying. Now, more boats have arrived from Tiberias, so now we've got more boats coming from across the sea, and they're coming over. So now we've got like people converging on the place where Jesus has done some of these things, and now they're going back across, they're seeking Jesus. Admirable, verse 24. They're seeking Jesus. Boy, that's what you want. Problem is, they're not seeking Him for the right reason, and He's going to call them on that. Verse 26. Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me, not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Remember in that first lesson this morning, I said, pay attention to the not but statements. Verse 27. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set His seal on Him. Then they said to Him, what shall we do that we may work the works of God? Jesus answered and said to them, this is the work of God, that you believe in Him whom He sent. Let's take that by itself for a second. So, Jesus is not interested in superficial discipleship. Jesus is not interested in us following Him for all the wrong reasons. We need to make sure we see that. And to be perfectly honest with you, to be pretty explicit about this, modern churches are feeding right into this. And I used the right word. They're feeding right into this. Guys, when we attract people with something that's not the gospel, we're not winning them to the gospel. Okay? And what you win people with, you have to keep people with. If we're inviting them to the movie nights, and that's what we're doing, a lot of modern churches do that. We're going to have a movie night on Wednesday night instead of Bible class. What happens when movie night quits? The kids quit coming. The people quit coming. If we're going to invite them and we're going to do all this stuff that nowhere in Scripture do we have the authority to do anyways, we're going to have to keep doing those things to keep them. But if we attract people with the truth of Jesus Christ, the gospel, what do we keep them with? We keep them with the gospel. You win people to King Jesus, for King Jesus, you'll keep them with King Jesus, okay? Look at that right there, verse 26 and 27. Boy, howdy, guys. Churches of Christ do this, okay? This is not even a denominational thing. We need to make sure we see that in this text, okay? So he says, you're seeking me for all the wrong reasons. Verse 27, do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life. Now, again, like I said in the first lesson this morning, the not but statements. He's not saying you shouldn't work for your food. That would contradict passages I read this morning in the first lesson. So that's not what he's saying. He is saying it's as if that stuff doesn't matter one bit. The other stuff is so important, that we're working for the food which endures to everlasting life. Okay? So, all of that is emphasized through Jesus Christ, the Son of Man. He gives this, He grants this, the Father set His seal on Him. All of this converges on the gospel, all of this converges on Jesus. And you'll notice verse 28, they say, well, wait, what about the works we need to do? He says, this is the work of God, that you believe Him, in Him whom He sent. Our religious friends who say, works and faith, contradict. They butt heads with one another. Actually, the gospel says they go together. They go together. Faith and works go together. We're getting it even right here. This is the work of God, that you believe in Him. Remember John 3, belief and obedience. They're used synonymously in John 3:36. So he says, verse 30, they said to Him, what sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? Our fathers ate the manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is He who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Now, notice something. He alludes to, verse 31, the manna from heaven. Remember earlier in our lesson this morning, I talked about Jesus kind of Moses in John 6. Well, now we're getting this manna from heaven stuff. Jesus is Moses in this chapter. Okay, he is the prophet to come. He is the manna from heaven. This is going to be even more important when we get into the next section on Wednesday night, but for now I'll just tuck this here. Verse 33, the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Really important, guys, that we see some of what he's saying in this context before we read what happens in verse 53, 54, 55. Because individuals will look at John 6 and say, it's the Lord's Supper. It is not the Lord's Supper. It is not the Lord's Supper. I recognize it sounds a whole lot like the Lord's Supper, but it's not the Lord's Supper. What we're reading right now helps us see that. The bread of God is he who comes down from heaven. So notice verse 34. Lord, give us this bread. You remember what the woman at the well said. Hey, you got water? Give us this water that we may never thirst again. Doing the same thing the woman at the well did. Okay? And so he says, I am the bread of life. Verse 35. He who comes to me shall never hunger. He who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have also seen me and do not believe. All the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. For I came down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of the Father who sent me, that of all he has given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day. And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. So, you're reading this text and you're saying, okay, why is this not the Lord's Supper? Because right here, guys, he comes out and just says it. What is this bread of life stuff? It's Jesus himself. So how do we get eternal life in this text? By coming to Jesus. And if you want to think about that poetic imagery, if we want the life Jesus promises, we must take him in fully. We must eat the bread he offers. We must drink the fruit he offers. Okay, the cup he offers. Okay, and that's part of what he's working on in this context. Okay, so important when we see that in verse 53, 54, and following. Okay, so just remember some of that. We got about 4 minutes here, and I felt like I've been talking too much. So let's do some applications. How about? So what are some ways we can take this text and put it into application? Live it out today, tomorrow, going on. This is going to be an awkward 4 minutes. Julie? Okay. Yeah. 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 Okay, so Jesus always provides. Would that be fair, Julie? Okay, so Jesus always provides. There's no shelf life to the bread he offers. Go ahead. Yeah. 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 Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, that's one of the sad side effects of our current world. We have de-emphasized text. And there's a reason. I think I've told you this. There's a reason I put my Bible up here every time I preach. I want you to see it. I want you to see my text. We are going to be in the text. Because what I'm saying is not near as important as what this text is saying, which is one of the reasons why you sit here in my class and you say, Devan, you're going to read that entire text? Yep, I am. And guess what I'm going to do in a minute when I preach? I'm preaching out of 2 Kings 22. We're going to read the whole chapter. Because what I'm saying about the text is not as important as what the text itself says. Okay? I walked all over that, John. What did you say? Emphasize the text? Okay. Okay. Well, that's not it. Hang on. I can't write, talk, and think at the same time, my friend. Here, I'll do this. Bring them to Jesus, because that's, yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. It's good stuff. Jeff? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Spiritual, that's not it. There we go. Spiritual over physical. And isn't that kind of what's going on around us a lot of times? We get this backwards, guys. We can't save people with physical things. We only can help them with the gospel. And so what do we need to put out? We need to put out the gospel. That's what we got to do, guys. I mean, you say, well, is that a fair application of John 6? You better believe it is. That's just explicitly what he says in verse 26, 27. We don't labor for the food which perishes. We labor for the food which endures to everlasting life. I mean, that's exactly what I preached on just a minute ago from Matthew 6. We've got to make sure we're doing that, okay? Got to make sure we're doing that. The day we quit offering the gospel as the means of salvation is the days we need to shut the doors because we're not doing what Christ wants us to do. If this church is going to be faithful to the New Testament pattern, we're going to do exactly what Jesus authorizes and nothing more, nothing less, okay? That's good stuff. What's one more? And then I'm going to share my applications. Okay, what's no more? I'll share you my applications. All right. So number one, we need to ask ourselves that question. Are we lifting our eyes and seeing the multitudes? I love that emphasis in this text and in John 4. Guys, this is our job, to open our eyes, see the people that need our King Jesus Christ. But we need to remember, we will win them with the gospel or we won't win them at all. Okay? We can have the fun nights, the game nights, the movie nights, the food, all that stuff. It does not help save souls, which is why we don't do it here, by the way. At least not as the church pays for and provides. Number two, Jesus can fill us abundantly. You want to see that again in our text? How many baskets were left over? Plenty. There were leftovers. You know how uncommon leftovers were in the first century? Yeah, Jesus provides leftovers, okay? Number three, with Jesus, there is no need to fear. I love what he does. You know, he walks up and they're terrified. These are fishermen. Have they been on Lake Galilee or Sea of Galilee before? Probably even at night? Yeah, especially in the hot summer months. I mean, they probably weren't noodling, but, you know, y'all are Oklahomans. Y'all ought to know that, okay? But the whole fact is, yeah, they fished at night too. But that night, they were terrified until Jesus says, don't be. Number four, are we laboring for the wrong food? Boy, that's a question we need to ask ourselves, folks. Are we laboring for the wrong food? And then number five, with Jesus, we will never be hungry again. When we come to Him for what He offers, and for the right reasons implied in that, guys, we'll hunger no more, okay? Let's look at that in the text again. Verse 35, I'm the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger. He who believes in me shall never thirst. You know, you need to put yourself a little bit in the woman at the well shoes. A lot of stuff here is stuff that happened there too. Here's a woman who's had what the world had to offer, and what does she want? Something else. Jesus provides something else. You look at the people in John 6, that they want something else. Jesus provides something else. He provides food. He provides drink. We'll never need any other, okay? But only if we actually come to Jesus Christ. I think I made this point in John 4. One of the subtle themes John's pushing here is number two, the application. Jesus can fill us abundantly. Because what's he doing with the woman at the well? He's providing what? He's providing water. What's he doing in John 6? He's providing what? Food. You know what that tells us, guys? Jesus provides everything we need. What do humans need? Food, water, oxygen, shelter. I don't know. It's pretty much short list. And what is Jesus offering in the gospel? All of these things and more. I mean, obviously with some spiritual connotations, but the whole point is Jesus provides exactly what we need. Okay? All right, I jumped the gun. We've got like 2 minutes. So you got time for one more application. I misread Steve's note up here about when we stopped. So what's one more application we can draw out of this? Jeff, you're itching. Just say it.
Well, I mean, you've said it many times, but for us to not stop being amazed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, I'll be honest. I'm going to make that point in my lesson here in just a minute. with 2 Kings 22. But, that has impressed me more in the last few weeks, just been on my mind more the last few weeks. At what point should we stop being impressed by the things we read in Scripture? At what point should we stop being amazed by the power and authority of our King Jesus Christ? Folks, just imagine that. He reaches into this basket. I mean, what did it, little boy, he's not carrying a wheelbarrow. Okay, these are not 75-pound Subway sandwiches, okay? This is not the 12-footer. He's not got 5 of these bad boys. This is not a big old tuna he just drug up on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and he's lugging it behind him. No, it's a little boy's lunch. He takes a little boy's lunch and feeds over 5,000 people with it. And I just go back in my mind to that image, just reaching into the basket, go hand that loaf out. Go hand that loaf out. Go hand that loaf out. And the disciples just go, how many times is he going to do that? Just counting it. There was 5 loaves in there when he started. 1, 2, 3. Wait, 7, 8, 9. Don't stop being amazed. All right. All right. Thank you for your careful attention. We'll jump into verses 41 through the end of the chapter on Wednesday night. Thank you.